My grandfather had bought some commercial property in our town many years ago. He had leased the property out to a branch of a huge national department store. After my grandfather died, that property was passed down to my dad. The department store tried to buy the land from my dad, but my dad knew that the property would only go up in value, so he refused. We basically lived off the rent the department store was paying us for the use of our land. It was steady income, but the rent which had been set so many years ago wasn't enough for us to have a comfortable life. I am an only child, and my dad told me that since the land would pass to me after him, I was set for life and wouldn't want to work like him. However, I was very clear that I didn't want to live my life like he did, especially since our financial state meant that I wouldn't be able to go to college without taking out a huge debt in the form of college loans. Once it was clear to me that I wasn't going to college, I started looking for a full-time job since I had been working part-time as a waitress when I was in high school. I had been adamant about not wanting to solely rely on the rent from the commercial property since I had been unable to get braces in my freshman year of high school because we couldn't afford them. I wasn't going to raise my future kids the same way. I wasn't sure what kind of job I would get straight out of high school, but I got really lucky when I found out that the used car dealership in our town was looking for a salesperson. I wasn't expecting the manager of the dealership to give me the job since I didn't have any experience in sales, but he told me that with a little bit of time and dedication, I would pick up how to be a good saleswoman. He said that I had to think of it as selling someone an experience instead of just a car. I had to show them how owning the car I wanted to sell would improve their lives in every way. Initially, it was hard to figure out how to make the most beneficial sale for the business, but slowly I figured out what type of selling style worked for which type of customers. And soon, I was the salesperson with the highest number of monthly sales in the company. The manager was very impressed with me, and soon enough he recommended me to the owner for the position of saleswoman in the luxury car dealership he also owned. I was able to get a promotion and started working selling high-end, expensive cars. I had to wear a suit to work and everything. It was a bit intimidating going from selling second-hand cars to selling top-of-the-line luxury cars, but once I realized that that didn't need to have any impact on my selling style, I started selling well there too. While I obviously wasn't making the same number of sales I had been making at the used car place, I was making more money for the business as we were selling cars that cost 3 times the amount used cars went for. It was around this time that my dad, unfortunately, got diagnosed with prostate cancer. It was very tough to go through that despite all our differences. My dad decided to transfer the ownership of the property to my name. He said that he wanted to make sure it all went smoothly before he died, so that there were no complications for me later on. The lease of the department was set to be renewed that year, and so I told my dad that I wouldn't be renewing the lease. My dad told me that if I renewed the lease, then I would have an income stream even if I lost my job or had any financial issues. But I told him that I had a plan to make sure that we actually got some proper benefits from the property. Even though my dad had put the property in my name, I didn't want to make the decision without his blessing, so I was very glad when he trusted me enough to agree with my decision. I ended the contract with the department store and decided to open up my own luxury car dealership. I knew that it was risky to go into direct competition with my employer, but I was ready to take the risk. I have made enough contacts with distributors in my time as a saleswoman to be able to source luxury cars for my dealership. Fortunately, the existing department store building needed very few adjustments and the large parking lot was perfect as well. Initially, it was tough to make a name for my dealership, but my huge focus on customer care and free upgrades slowly built up a large market share. Soon, distributors were approaching me instead of the other way around, and I was able to build a very successful business. I even had to hire a manager to oversee the day-to-day workings of the dealership since I was too busy with the business side of things. Everything had been going really well without any hiccups until this incident happened over Christmas. So on Christmas Eve, I was the only person in the building since I was waiting for a client to come pick up a car they had ordered for their son as a Christmas present. Once that was done, I was about to lock up when a boy walked into the dealership. He walked over to one of our most expensive cars and tried to open the door to get inside. I went up to him and told him that the dealership was closing for the holidays and would reopen before New Year's on the 28th for that one day, so he could come back then. He just smirked and said that I should get familiar with him since I would be seeing a lot more of him. I asked him what he was talking about, and he said that I must be a random lowly employee who had to work on holidays, so I didn't know that he basically owned the place since it was his dad's dealership. At first, I thought he was just kidding, but once I realized he was actually being serious, I told him that he was mistaken and that I wanted him to leave the dealership. He scoffed and said that I was nobody to tell him what to do. He told me that he wanted to take one of our Mercedes for a couple of days. I told him the price of the car and said that if he could afford it, only then would I let him take the car. When he heard that, he just started laughing, saying that he didn't have to pay at all since it was his dad's dealership. I was about to correct him when I realized that there was no point in arguing with him, so I told him to leave before I was forced to call the police. I thought he would leave after hearing my threat about calling the police, but instead, he walked up to the manager's desk and took out the car keys from the drawer and unlocked the door. I asked him what the hell he thought he was doing, and he told me that he was going to take his new car out for a spin. I tried to grab the keys from him, but he pushed me away and got into the car. I told him that if he moved the car even an inch, then I would report him to the police for theft. He said that it wasn't theft since it belonged to his dad anyway. I asked him who his dad was, and he took the name of my newly appointed manager. I realized that he had no idea that his dad was just the manager of the dealership and not the owner. I tried to tell him that his dad didn't own the dealership. I did, but he just laughed and said that I was lying and started the car. I tried to reach the doors to close them in time, but I wasn't fast enough as the boy raced the car out of the dealership. I immediately called the police and told them what had happened. I gave them the license plate number of the car and the direction the boy had gone in, and the police said that they would send units out to locate him. I then called the manager, the boy's dad, and told him what had happened. He was shocked to hear what his son had done. He said that they had had a fight since the manager had refused to buy his son a new car after he had totaled the last one he bought him. His son had left the house after the fight, and the manager had no idea that his son would try to steal a car from the dealership. The manager told me that he was on his way, and soon after I got a call from the police saying that they had found the car, but it was in very bad state since the boy had driven the car into a tree on the passenger side. The boy only had a few superficial cuts and taken to the police station. His father and I also arrived at the station. His dad begged me not to press charges. He told me that he would pay the cost of the car and reprimand his son, but I told him that I had a better idea. I went inside and told the boy that if he chose to work at the dealership until he had worked off the cost of the car, then I wouldn't press charges. But if he left it up to his dad to clean up his mess, then he would have an arrest forever lodged in his history. The boy decided to take me up on the offer of working off the cost of the car, and so I told the police I wouldn't be pressing charges. He has been working for the dealership for almost a month now, and it has actually done a great job in humbling him. Years ago, I worked in the energy industry. My location was manned by a single person, working 10-hour days with 8 days on and 6 days off. In the off hours, automation kept things running. During those 8 days, I was on call, so if there was any problem at the location, I was required to drop what I was doing and either log in to fix some issues or drive the 50 miles out to the facility to fix the problem. Company policy stated that if there was a call, regardless if it warranted a response to drive out or if we could handle it remotely through our computer, we got paid for a minimum of 2 hours at time and a half. After a particularly rough shift with lots of nights spent on location, I went on a much needed set of days off. On my first day off, my counterpart on the other shift called with questions about the problems I had had. I answered and went about resting. The next day, I decided to take a break and go off-grid for the day. When I returned, I had a number of calls from my boss. When I called him back, he reprimanded me and told me that I was an on-call employee, so I need to answer when called. Annoyed, I just said okay, but asked him to follow that up with an email, which he did. We talked more about the problems for about 10 minutes and hung up. That evening, my counterpart called 3 more times and we talked through some ideas for fixing it. Over the next 4 days I had off, he, my boss, and others working on the issue called many times. Now, remember, when my boss said I was an on call employee and I was required to answer, I added each call to my timesheet. At the end of my 6 days off, I had made just as many hours I would in my 8 day shift. At the end of the pay period, I was called into the office where he and the district manager demanded that I explain the excessive callouts. I provided the email sent to me by my boss as well as the company policy for calls. They said that was a pretty wide interpretation of both. I countered and said that I had been called and I answered as required by my boss's email, so per policy, I was entitled to call out pay. They disagreed and called in the vice president and HR, who surprisingly agreed with me. I was paid out for the time, and the rule became that you were only to call off-duty employees in dire emergencies. I was never called on my days off again. I used to be a server at a major restaurant chain that you see in every mall in the US, and my particular location just happened to be one of the wealthier parts of the country. Because of that, a large percentage of the clientele wanted their dishes a certain way. There were some oddball regulars, like the one lady who wanted a Caesar salad with no dressing, but 3 whole lemons to squeeze onto the lettuce. But 99% of the time, they'd ask for rigatoni instead of penne in a dish, or red onion instead of a yellow on a burger, or something of that nature. The thing about this chain, though, is that technically you're supposed to charge them for substitutions like that. So, for instance, if a guest wanted a different kind of dressing on a salad, it might be a 10-cent charge. Or if they wanted Swiss instead of cheddar on their burger, it would be like a 15-cent charge. As a server, you were supposed to know all of the upgrades, but because there were like 26 pages to the menu, it was daunting enough to just memorize what we even had. But obviously, no one ever charged for these things because what's an extra 15 cents on a $200 tab? Especially when you're in the weeds and you're pretty sure the host stand wants you to have a mental breakdown. Not only that, but because rich people tend to be the stingiest MFers you'll ever meet, we would never charge them because they would instantly complain if you did. And the restaurant's policy was essentially, the customer is always right, no matter how wrong they were. We even had regular grifters that would order the wrong thing and then complain and get an entire meal for free every freaking time. So, one normal day, I'm serving a table and someone asked for goat cheese on their salad instead of feta, which is supposed to be one of the 10-cent changes. I obviously don't add the upcharge, just like I hadn't for any of the other countless times in over 3 years, and like 15 minutes later, the new manager, I'll just call him Brad, comes along and pretty much chews me out over it. Keep in mind, this is Brad's second day on the job, and he came from the other side of the country to replace our beloved former manager, who left to manage her own restaurant. This dude hadn't even introduced himself to me, and he comes out of nowhere to yell at me for not doing an upcharge. I explained to him why I didn't, and how it was pretty much a directive from the GM not to do upcharges because of the 99% chance that a complaint and free meal would follow. But Brad just blah 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 some more and tells me that I need to add upcharges or I'd get written up. So when the next table, a party of 7 that had roughly a $500-ish bill, changes literally every dish, I added the upcharges, which totaled like $1 at most. When I dropped the check, they freaked out over all the upcharges, even though I informed them that the charges when they ordered. The itemized receipt made it look so much more severe, and they demanded to speak to the manager. Instead of getting any of the other managers I had worked with for years, I grabbed Brad and made him deal with them. He ended up having to comp all $500-ish because he insisted I charge an extra $1 for all the substitutions. But did he learn his lesson? Nope. So I did it over and over again to the detriment of my bank account. Most people tip me though, so that was nice. And I got to watch tables routinely chew him out over the charges. This continued for a month or so until he finally relented, and not too long after, I was suspiciously fired for creating a hostile work environment while on vacation. My dad is a patient guy and lives to keep my mom happy. The old wife happy, happy life. My entire family goes crazy at Christmas. We decorate everything. Stand still too long and you'll have tinsel and lights on you. Mom was getting out her Christmas table setting and commented that she didn't have any fancy Christmas glasses to match the dishes. Cue Dad. Dad usually has the TV on while she's doing her other stuff, writing, reading, just basically background noise. He was retired and disabled from the army, so he had some time and used the drive-thru because he walks unsteady. Alright, well, a familiar fast food chain was offering a 99-cent Christmas goblet. It had holly and stuff and a goldish rim with the menu item purchase, one per visit, so Dad, to keep my mom happy, drove to the restaurant and ordered a small soda and a goblet. It was about $2. This was a few years ago. He asked if he could buy more because his wife wanted a set. Nope, one per purchase per visit. So Dad followed their orders. P orders a drink, buys a glass. Back in line in the drive-thru. He did this 5 times in the drive-thru. Orders a drink, buys a glass, orders a drink, buys a glass, orders a drink, buys a glass, repeat. Now Dad has 5 drinks that he was going to just take home and had run out of room in the car. Finally, someone seeing that this guy is going to keep driving through and clogging up the system in the drive-thru caught on. Next time he gets to the order spot, they ask him, "How many goblets do you need?" Dad said 12. So they allowed him to purchase the remaining 7 for $7, and he didn't have to keep clogging up the drive-thru for a soda order. He said, "I tried to do that the first time." We've still got that fine set of fast food goblets that are an official family heirloom now.